episode of Unzip, Reboot, and Believe URL podcast. Today, we have someone who is working in organizational leadership, development, change, and business strategies for last 2 decades. She authored the Quietly Powerful book, which was the recipient of the Australian Career Book Award and Business Book Best Leadership Award in 2020. Please welcome Megumi Miki. How are you, Megumi?
Oh, well, thanks. How are you? Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Thank you for your time. Okay, just for our audience today, our whole conversation will be a little bit more educational, more theoretical, because we try to understand the context and the model, how the organizations or the society to some extent working. So, first question to you on that is leadership. Okay, you talk about you work with leaders and um, like building new leaders and all. What how many types of leadership are actually there? And because some places it says five, some say seven, some says 30, doesn't matter. How many actually the leadership styles are and how they actually operate?
It's a great question because I don't know how many leadership styles there are. There's so many theories.
Yeah.
And I heard something like there's 10,000 leadership books written a year, something like that, which is ridiculous. So I think leadership styles and theories, there's just so many of them, and it's really about finding what is right for you and for the organization and the strategy that you're trying to implement. So while I think it's good to know some of the styles just for your own awareness to think about how am I leading and what impact is that having. So for example, one style that's often talked about is like an authoritarian style. Now, that's a very directive, telling people what to do type of style. And if you notice yourself going down that track and it's not working, which can happen particularly in a egalitarian kind of environment. People don't like being told what to do. Particularly the younger generation, they don't like being told what to do. So, it's not going to work
Mm.
for you. However, there are situations where it is necessary. So, for instance, there's a fire going on and you know what to do, then you got to become authoritarian, right? You have to tell people what to do, where to go, etc. So you can't box yourself into one style. I think that's the most important thing to consider. It's about being more intentional and monitor what works in different situations. So if you are working with Gen Zs and you notice that they're disengaged, they're not listening to you, that they don't want to work with you, then you'd really have to start considering more of a collaborative or a participatory leadership style. So you're
Mhm.
involving them in decision making, you're involving them in idea generation, and people thrive much more. Some people thrive much more in that kind of environment. But then again, it's not even generational. Some people like having real clear structures, whilst other people like loose structures. So again, it may depend on the situation. So that's the situational awareness and much more observant of the individuals that you're working with and how you can use that to be effective as a leader. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is what are you like naturally? So, as you mentioned, I wrote this book called Quietly Powerful, which is about I interviewed a number of quietly powerful leaders who've been successful by using their quiet nature as a leadership strength. And so, if you're naturally quieter and there are certain things that you do better than others, then why not use that in your leadership? So, for example, some of these quietly powerful leaders, or actually all of them, said that one of their leadership strengths was listening, really listening and involving others, listening to different ideas. So it lends towards more of that participatory leadership, or a authentic leadership is sometimes talked about. So they're quite happy to be very authentic about what they don't know, what they're not good at. So that can be very helpful if you're naturally inclined that way. But that doesn't mean to say that somebody who's not so quiet can't do that either. So I know it's not a straight answer, but I do see it as a very fluid thing, that it's not just about, okay, you're like this, therefore you should be a leader like that. It's both and. So it's both, you're like this, therefore you're probably more inclined to be like this. But if the situation or the individual requires it, do adapt to make sure that you're effective in that case.
Mm. So, like, I can understand that, but theoretically, but in
Yeah.
real life, can one person really behave like all these?
Maybe not all of them. So
But
maybe I'm thinking about some of the leaders that I interviewed, the quietly powerful leaders. I can imagine if it's absolutely necessary, I can see some of them being authoritarian. So I'm thinking of some of them who have a very strong sense of knowing, a strong conviction about things, and they can see something's going wrong and they may become more directive as a result. I can see that happening even for a quieter leader.
mhm,
But I think some of the other people who I interviewed, they'll probably go about it in a different way. So rather than telling people, they might consult them and, influence them in a different way. In fact, we talked a lot about influence is not about persuasion necessarily. It does involve persuasion, but it can be about other ways of influencing. So it might be really listening to the person, understanding what their concerns are, and really working with them collaboratively to work out a solution. That's influence. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate that kind of influence, and quietly powerful leaders do that really well.
mm.
Yes.
But that does that mean that everyone is a leader? Because in organizational level, there is always a debate who is a manager, who is a leader. Like can managers they can definitely take or learn these kind of skills,
Mhm.
but some people have that naturally.
Yes.
So people who have more like natural inclination towards these skills, they are more into leadership already. Is that the right way to approach it?
I wish it was, but I don't think it is. So
Okay.
I actually talk about and have written articles about the gap or the difference between leadership emergence and leadership effectiveness. So leadership emergence is who gets promoted into leadership positions, and leadership effectiveness is who leads well. And they, if you think about two concentric circles, they don't overlap that much.
Wow, this is very nice way to put it.
Yeah. So meaning people who are promoted and actually lead well, there's not that many of them, unfortunately. Because those people who emerge as leaders, and this is why I wrote Quietly Powerful in some ways, you may have come across people who you look at them go, they really shouldn't have been promoted. Have you noticed?
Always.
Always, well, maybe not always, but
Okay. Yeah,
sometimes,
most of the time.
yeah, from time to time you see them.
Yes.
And sometimes it's because they present themselves well, they speak well, they look confident, they appear charismatic. They do tend to get noticed as leadership material, even if their actual leadership and results that they get from their leadership is not necessarily as effective. So there's people who get promoted by mistake, if you like, and then there's the other side, which is people who get overlooked, even though they have really good leadership attributes. So they are typically the quieter ones because they don't self-promote. They don't necessarily speak up that much, so they may not get noticed as much. But if you watch the results that they get, how people work with them as a leader, some of them are really, really effective. So how is it that they don't get promoted? I wish they
Mhm.
did, but there is a gap. So that's why I talk to organizations and say, well, how are you actually spotting some of this hidden talent? And if you're not, it's actually costing you a lot as an organization, because as you would imagine, having good leaders, having good managers make a big difference to performance, to how people feel, to well-being for people. Mental health, you talk about mental health, it's not just about the individual, it's also about what environment they're in. So, leaders make a big difference. So, yeah, so
Mm.
that's where I think it's really important for organizations to start thinking about, well, how are we choosing our leaders, not just about and not getting caught up in who looks good or who sounds good
And,
and this
and
style.
yeah, and like sometimes, uh, this quietness, okay, I'm
Mm,
not going into the extrovert or introvert. Sometimes
mm,
the situation also make people a bit quiet
that's
because
right.
they are
That's
not
right.
getting the
That's right.
the necessary support and all. So in those kind of situations, how they kind of navigate.
Yeah. No, thanks for bringing that question because I often get mistaken for speaking about introversion because I talk about quietly powerful, but I always say this is beyond introversion. And I appreciate all the work that's been done around introversion. I'm sure you've come across Susan Cain's work around quiet, and that's made introversion something that people are more familiar with. And I think that's really good. But as you say, quietness doesn't only come from introversion. I know extroverts who come to my quietly powerful programs, and there are reasons, other reasons, that they might be quiet. And there's also a distinction between being quiet and being disempowered. And there's also quiet being powerful. So I'll distinguish that as well. So the being quiet can come from personality, of course, but it's not just about introversion. It can also come from some people who have what's called high neuroticism or high emotionality. They get worried, they get anxious about speaking up. So they go quiet thinking, oh, I can't think of the right thing to say, or they worry about what people might think of them. So that might cause people to go quiet. So that's another aspect of personality. There's also cultural conditioning that we were talking about before around, you might have been brought up in a culture where just agreeing with everybody is the right thing to do. Don't make somebody lose face, or especially if there's somebody with a senior position or authority in the room, do not disagree with them. That's not the done thing. That's why you might go quiet. So there's cultural conditioning that may be at play. The other thing is also what I call, or what people call power dynamics. So in any given group, there are people who feel more comfortable than others. That in itself is power. Okay, so people often talk about power in terms of hierarchy, but that's not the only thing. So hierarchy has a place. So if some like a CEO walks into a meeting, then people usually kind of defer to the CEO. So that's normal. That's hierarchy. But imagine if you were the only Indian person in the room and everybody else was talking about footy. I don't know if you're into football, but you feel a little less powerful because everybody else is talking about it. You can't relate. And so you might just stay quiet because you don't know a lot about it. So, I can totally get that because I don't particularly watch football that much. I know a little bit, but not enough. So I'll be quiet when people are talking about football or cricket for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, absolutely. So power dynamics in the sense of not just hierarchy, but the majority versus minority is another power dynamic at play. Or even if it's an opinion, like imagine if you're speaking about some topic and you're the only one with a different idea. It's very difficult to bring that up because you have a sense that they're all going to challenge you and attack you. So that you might stay quiet in that instance too. So there's lots of reasons why, and all of these that I just described, I feel they're more quietly disempowered. So you don't feel very powerful you're kind of silencing yourself in a way. So that's not very powerful. While as you can also be quietly powerful if you're using your quietness intentionally. So in negotiations, I'm sure you can imagine, if you talk too much, you actually lose.
Yeah.
Or even in a sales situation, sometimes the salespeople who talk too much and don't listen enough lose the sale because I don't like being pushed things. Most people don't. Whereas if I encounter somebody who really listens and understands and works with what I really want, then I'm probably more likely to buy something. So there's that quietness is very powerful. Or in a meeting, if somebody's not saying a lot and they do say something that's very, very wise, everybody leans in and listens, and it's very, very powerful. So there's a difference between those sorts of ways of being quiet.
But Australian corporate culture often sees as very conservative and
Hmm.
very risk averse.
Hmm.
So they are not very open with new ideas and innovation. But the way world is today, do you think that corporate culture needs to be more open so that more innovation, more new ideas, more new interplay of skill can happen?
I think it's going to be more necessary. But the challenge there is, as you say, conservatism and risk aversion is a strong force, because I think a lot of corporates, they're often rewarded for performance, meaning don't stuff up,
Mhm. Mhm.
as opposed to try new things and fail, but that might result in something new and creative. That's more risky. And I don't know whether you've come across Dr. Amy Edmondson. She is the one that talks about psychological safety, but her newer book is about failing well. I've just lost the name of the book, but it is about failing well versus failing in a not so useful way. So if you keep on failing and you don't learn anything, that's not a very useful way of failing. But if you deliberately go out to try something new and you failed, then it's not really a bad failure, which is what innovation's about. I'm sure as an entrepreneur, you would know that the number of times you fail is what gives you all the learning. So in corporates, I think that is really hard because you get rewarded for performance in a very short time cycle as well.
Mhm. And as you mentioned before, the more structured environment,
Mm,
more these kind of managers thrive because everything is structured and hardly
yeah,
any
yeah,
space for new talks or new ideas. But
yeah,
the same person who is absolutely powerless in that kind of situation can be very powerful when things are a bit chaotic, things are kind
yeah,
of
can be.
can be nudging and
Yeah.
going into something different. Okay.
Yeah, not all companies are so risk averse and conservative in that there are some companies, and probably you see that more in the United States. I think they have a very entrepreneurial national culture as well, so they tend to have those sorts of innovative companies, and some other countries as well. But even in Australia, I'm sure there are smaller companies too that do have that attitude of it's okay to fail if we're trying something new. And if you're able to do that, then yes, definitely you can have an innovative culture.
So more and more these things are coming from your experience, right?
I
Because
think so. Well, I think out of necessity, and
because of
also
necessity.
people understanding more about how do you create an innovation culture. We talked earlier about psychological safety being one of the aspects of it as well. In corporate culture, there's a lot of people talking about that too.
Right, right. Okay, now I know you are Japanese. You born here but raised in different countries. I was born and raised in India. Now I'm here. This question is coming from, can we really understand each other's culture? I mean, after living 20 years in this country, yes, I know few. Still, I don't not much into footy. Still
Yeah,
into cricket.
yeah,
If there is not many options, yes, I can have burgers and chips.
yeah,
But the moment I have some other options, I'll go there.
yeah.
What is your understanding? Can we really understand culture, or it, we just try to increase our level of tolerance?
Yeah. Um, Yeah, my thought about that is that do we have to understand? So if we can take delight in learning about something new, a new culture or a new aspect of somebody's culture, rather than getting judgmental or afraid of them, then it doesn't matter that we don't understand them fully. So if we, I don't know, for example, if we're talking about different cultures and, I discover that, and it's actually not even cultures, it's even about individuals. So if I discover something new about you, Gautam, and if I think, oh my God, that's so interesting, versus, really, you do that? Even at the individual level, there's a very different relationship we build. So if we can apply that at a cultural level too, and just be more curious and more appreciative of difference, I think that's what solves the problem rather than understanding everybody's culture. So I know we talked a little bit about Erin Meyer's work and Gert Hofstede's work, and it's useful as a framework to have a general idea of what different cultures are like. Um, and as a whole, if you look at a whole, you can probably see the difference. Let's take Japanese culture as an Australian, the timeliness of their trains that is very distinct. The linear scheduling tendency rather than a flexible one. So that's like accurate and linear and, timely and things like that. That's a very Japanese thing. And Australians a little bit like, oh, well, trains 2 minutes late. Well, that's normal.
Yeah.
So, so on the whole, you'll see that. But if you actually look at individuals, and I'm Japanese, Australian born Japanese. I am definitely not a linear time scale person. I'm a little bit loose. So um, if you go to the individual level, you can't assume that somebody's exactly like that national culture. So I think we just have to be a bit more curious and open to differences rather than trying to go, okay, she's Japanese, therefore she must be like this, because it's definitely that can be quite dangerous because we
Yeah.
make assumptions.
Living in a certain society for a long time. Now,
Mm,
long time is also debatable, but I guess over 10 years,
yeah,
I guess we also lose some of our
of course.
previous identities and like, you know, absorb few. So we are also not, you are also not typically Japanese.
That's
I'm also
right.
probably not typically
That's
Indian,
right.
Indian that way.
Yeah, that's right. We're a bit
So,
of a blend, and I think that's what makes it interesting, isn't it? That rather
yeah,
than you're one type, we're all a mixture of different things. And then there's also family dynamics that can really play a part, or experiences you had in your life that's changed the way that you see things. So I think we can't box people into anything really. Each individual has some kind of uniqueness.
yeah,
So
okay,
and so as a child, I went to 3 different countries and went to 8 different schools. So that in itself has shaped some of the way that I am. And but then as I grew up and as I became an adult, I had to challenge some of the things that I had. For example, I often used to think I really needed to blend in and fit in, and that's part of the reason why I was quiet as well, to not speak up and not to challenge anybody, just go along with everybody. But as an adult, of really broken down that pattern because it wasn't very helpful. So yeah, so we can change over time as well. So that's another complexity. Human beings are complex naturally.
Life situation also sometimes dictates how
Mm,
you are perceiving the
totally.
situation, like
Yeah.
how secured you are, how in your life is chaotic or not,
Mm,
all
mm,
those kind of stuff. Okay.
mm. And then also how you respond to that situation. So somebody might have a chaotic situation and thrive still, and the others might have a chaotic situation and be traumatized. So I think there's also the response to the situation.
Yeah. Okay. Now, from the organizational angle, definitely
Mm,
psychological safety is a big thing in Australian
mm,
corporate
mm,
culture. Everyone is talking about that.
mm,
Uh, from your experience, when it comes to real, sharing some ideas or something which is very abrupt, uh, you know, does that psychological safety actually works? It definitely. For me, in some cases, it's just like another tick box. It's not
Mm-hmm.
actually helping the cause itself too much
Mm-hmm.
in many cases, not all the time.
Mm-hmm.
What is your take on that?
Mm. I think I would refer to some of what Amy Edmondson, who really popularized this idea of psychological safety. I've seen her a few times talk about and write about how she's a bit disappointed how the whole idea of psychological safety is misused. So, and I've also written about it as well, where we talk about safety as if it's about being comfortable.
Right.
So we mix up safety with comfort. While the psychological safety can be uncomfortable because what you're talking about, especially in the context of innovation, is that you're coming up with ideas that really challenge the status quo, it might challenge your own beliefs, etc. And that in a true sense of psychological safety that Amy Edmondson and some other authors who talk about psychological safety talks about, that kind of productive disagreement or productive challenge, that should be enabled by psychological safety. That should be encouraged and invited in psychological safety.
Uh,
Unfortunately, a lot of people take psychological safety and say, I don't feel safe to speak up. Well, as actually, it might mean I don't feel comfortable speaking up. That's different.
True.
Yeah. And
Very true.
having said that, there is a line though where the discomfort turns into lack of safety as well. So it's a bit um it's not so black and white, I think. But
Right.
I do think if organizations and leaders really get that psychological safety is not about comfort, that actually disagreement and challenging ideas and challenging the status quo is what psychological safety enables, then I think we've got something really useful.
Mm.
And it does come to how the leader might respond. So I'm sure you've come across people or leaders who, you bring up a new idea and go, oh, that'll never work, or, they try and sort of squash it down, or they'll justify how they're doing things at the moment. And, there's lots of ways that you can squash a new idea. And um, so that response in itself, it's even if it's safe, to me, that's also about your capacity to think more broadly. So openness and mental spaciousness, as I also call it. My colleagues, I have a couple of colleagues I work with, and we talk about leaders who listen. So leaders who actually have the mental capacity and spaciousness to be open to different ideas and so on are going to be able to create safety as well as the space for new ideas.
Last 2, 3 decades
Mm,
is with all these IT boom engineers and all these things. It's a left brain dominated
mm,
boom, I believe. And because of AI and all these things, now I believe next no, 2, 3 decades will be the right brain
mm,
domination, more creativity, more how you can contextualize things.
mm, mm,
In that context, I mean, what kind of leadership do you believe that will flourish in next 2, 3 decades?
mm. Yeah, it's a good question, and I can't predict exactly, but I think directionally speaking, I think the type of leadership that's going to thrive is going to be a more expanded version than what we have currently. So I don't think the left brain in your language, so the logical, the more managerial, the technical side, I don't think they can disappear necessarily. That you still have to have logic and you still have to have that sort of analytical thinking ability, but that ability to think more at a high level, the context, the whole system, and also using more than your intellect. So your sensing ability, your emotional capacity, your spiritual capacity, all of those broader aspects of what it is to be human. I think that will be very much more needed And whether we get there or not it might be another question, but I think certainly we do need more of those sort of expanded versions of leadership, I think.
I mean, what is spirituality? You have to understand. It's not definitely a God thing.
Yeah.
It's what? It's a mindset. It's understanding where the other person is coming from, why he is or she is reacting in that way.
Well, in the context of leadership, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so I don't have a clear answer on that, but when I think of spirituality in the context of an organization or a leadership perspective, um, it's something that's much deeper than just doing the work. So to me, it's more about where are you coming from? And in some, you could label it as, what's the meaning or the purpose that you're bringing into the work that you're doing. You could label it that way. But I don't have quite the right words for it, but it just feels a lot deeper that it's bringing the whole human to the work rather than just doing the work.
As you know, if you want to live your life in your own terms, this is the right place. This is URL Podcast. Thank you, Megumi. Thank you for your time.